Good evening and welcome to this special event that we're having tonight. You know, I was reading the book of Hebrews not long ago, and the writer in chapter 11 gives us a list of names of men and women who the author said the world was not worthy of. And I began to look at that list and I thought to myself, wow, this is God's Hall of Fame. Some things began to stir in my heart and I began to ponder, I wonder what it would have been like to have sat down with each of them and spoken to them about their lives, their ministries, and the things that were counted worthy to be mentioned in the book of Hebrews. Well, of course, many of you who know me know that things turn up here sometimes. And I began to think to myself, we have a lot of heroes in the faith in the Church of God. We have a lot of men and women who have paved the way, who have led the way for us to have what we have today. And I believe with all of my heart that God also has a list of the Hall of Fame within our movement and our denomination. So I began to put together a few names that I wanted to interview, some people that I wanted to talk about their lives, talk about their ministries, and things that they just feel from God concerning the season that we're living in. And so I wanted to begin today with a hero of mine, a gentleman who has been a pastor, evangelist, state and international administrator. He has held so many positions within our church, a man who has a passion for Christ, a passion for the church, and a passion for souls. So I want to welcome tonight Reverend Larry Timmerman. Thank you, Brother Timmerman, for being a part of this. It's so good to have you.
Thank you, Michael. It is an honor to be here with you. And when you were talking about the giants of the faith, heroes of all of us, I certainly admire what you are doing because here in Cleveland, where I live, when I was 14 years old, my father came to the North Cleveland Church of God to pastor. And right across the road from the church, the general overseer lived, Dr. James Cross, a great man of God. And I was so honored to be a part of that time period in the Church of God when everything was in a little 3-block radius around the great North Cleveland Church of God. So I'm glad I could come and be a part of this today and looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much. Well, let's get started. I want to go back even before your ministry. I want to talk a little bit about when and where you were born. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. I was born in Anderson, South Carolina, on Oral Mill Village. You know, we called the uptown folks said it was the Mill Hill, but we called it, we tried to put a little better term on it, but I came from Anderson, Indiana, but my father being a minister, we weren't there very long, and we began to move around as ministers always do. So I started this journey of life in Anderson, South Carolina, and many of our ministers have come out of that city. And so I am proud of my heritage.
Yes. Well, what was your childhood like? You mentioned to me that your father, of course, was a minister in the church, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But what was your childhood like moving from church to church and the way things were in those days?
Oh, that's something I like to talk about because it formed my life even to this day. The first thing I remember as just a small boy was my father was going from Mill Village to Mill Village in South Carolina and North Carolina, and he would get the recreation hall, and the mills would always let the churches use those free of charge, and he would begin a revival. And those revivals would run from a month to 2 months. It was amazing back in those days how that the Spirit of the Lord moved in such a powerful way. And I would move to that Mill Village, organize a church, and the overseer would appoint a pastor. Then Dad would go to another Mill Village. And so one that is known by most of the people from North Carolina, which we lived there for a number of years. My dad organized the South Raleigh Church of God there, and I remember us moving there. When we moved to Raleigh, we had an old car, an old Buick, and a cedar chest in the back seat with everything we owned in that cedar chest. And I was laying on top of the cedar chest. And Dad left there and he went to Gastonia and organized the Randlow Church of God. And that was an amazing time and day, because after 6 weeks of revival, he organized that church with almost 200 members. And they built a nice church, and we stayed there for 4 years total. And then Dad went to Lenoir, North Carolina to pastor, which was an established church. And while Dad was there, I watched him build a church. It was one of the 3 largest Sunday schools in the Church of God. As you probably know, or some may not remember, but in those days, we didn't talk about morning worship service or how many you had in the morning worship. You had talked about Sunday school. How many did you have in Sunday school? And all of the pastors in the Gastonia area would meet on Sunday night at Tony's ice cream parlor after church, and we'd all talk about what God did that day. And so those were great memories. And at Lenoir, Dad started the first bus ministry in the Church of God. And I remember those 6 buses that Dad started with, and they would come up to the top of the hill there in Lenoir with people hanging out the windows. Regulations weren't known back then. They'd have 80 people on a bus that's supposed to hold 50 or 60. And, but I remember those days, and those were the days that Tremont Avenue and Kannapolis and Lenoir would fight for the top Sunday school in the Church of God. 1 month, one would be ahead, and next month the other. But I remember those days as a boy, and as I watched my father plant churches, pastor churches, build churches, I am imprinted even to this day. Many things that I do, I learned from my father.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad we were able to do this interview, because I did not know your connection with North Carolina. And of course, you know, I've been born and raised in North Carolina, and know well about all the churches that you just mentioned. So that's incredible to know that you have that connection with our state. Now, speaking of your father, after he pastored, he was a well-known minister within the Church of God. He too, like yourself, held many positions and was also the voice of Forward in Faith. Tell us, what kind of a person was your dad? Some of your memories about his ministry specifically.
Well, one of the things that stands out about Dad was he was a very strong people person. Dad, in every place that he went, became known in the city and community where he pastored. And that's one of the things that I gleaned from, because his philosophy of pastoring and living, really, but it came through in his pastoral ministry more than any other place, I thought, was the fact that he said, wherever you are, there's going to be an enemy. The enemy is going to fight us if we're doing anything good for the kingdom. But he used to tell me, son, make your worst enemy in the church work that you're in your best friend. Don't ever react to the negative. Always operate in the positive. And I learned a lot of lessons like that in the work of God, because it's so important how we react to everything that we face. And one particular place where the former pastor he warned Dad of a particular man that he would give him all kinds of trouble. And so when Dad heard that, he realized the problems that the pastors before had had. And so Dad made this person his very best friend. And when Dad left there was no one took it any harder than he did. So I'll never forget the fact that Dad would always say, it doesn't cost anything to be nice to people.
Wow, what a lesson. What a lesson. Well, obviously, you were introduced to the Church of God from birth. Brother Timmerman, are you an only child?
No, I am the oldest of four children. I have three siblings. My sister Martha is next to me. She was born in Gastonia, North Carolina, while we were there. She's 6 years younger than I am. And my brother Jerry, he lives here in Cleveland. He pastored the Sweetwater Church of God in Tennessee. And my youngest sister, Karen Sue, she lives here also. And so after all of these years and us scattered out all over the country for so many years, we're back in one locality together. So we're blessed with a brother and two sisters, and we're all a product of the church.
Wow, that's an incredible history. Well, you know, we cannot talk about Larry Timmerman without talking about Jan Timmerman. You know, one of the things that has so impressed me about your ministry over the years is your connection with your wife. You can tell the absolute love that you have for her and that she has for you. Why don't you tell us, how did you guys meet, and when did you get married? And tell us a little bit about your family.
I was at Lee. Dad, after he finished 4 years at North Cleveland as the pastor, he moved to Michigan as the state administrative bishop, we call them now. A lot of us my age still call them state overseers. But Dad moved to Michigan, and I stayed at Lee College. It wasn't Lee University at that time. Quite a different place now. So from 300 to 5,000 students is quite a jump and a change. But it has been an impactful time in my life. In fact, the 4 years, my high school years that I was in Cleveland, probably are the most important years of my life, because we lived in Illinois before that. Dad was appointed from Lenoir to Illinois as the state administrative bishop. And I started playing basketball up there. And boy, I didn't want to leave, because Coach Thompson at the Mount Vernon Rams in Illinois had done so much for me. He impacted my life so much. I wanted to be a professional basketball player. And so Dad moved us to Cleveland. But now, as I look back, in fact, Coach Thompson tried to get Dad to let me stay there and live with him and play ball there for the rest of the time in Illinois. But Dad would not agree to that, and I'm so glad that he didn't, even though I wanted to at the time. And so when we got to Cleveland, North Cleveland had a youth program, just a tremendous youth program. We were involved in a lot of different things, and Lee being right there impacted my life also. And so these are years that were very important, not just in my life, but in every young person's life. High school is a very, very important time for any young person. And so being in Cleveland and becoming acquainted with the church as I was, I mean, it's like Brother Cross. He didn't have a television back then at his house across the street from the church, because we had a lot of people during those years that didn't think a minister should have one, or in fact, no one should have one. But on Saturday nights, Brother Cross would slip down when he was in town to our house and watch wrestling. He loved wrestling. And so I got to know these people. Brother Paulk lived across the street, Earl Paulk, and all of these men, Brother Moorhead, just tremendous men of God. And so those 4 years impacted me, and I stayed at Lee, and I went to Michigan for Christmas. And they called me knowing that the overseer's son was in for the holidays. And they invited me to a Christmas party at one of the members' houses. And Delbert Rose, I don't know if you remember Delbert Rose or not, he was my best friend. We ran together. And so I called Delbert and said, come up. He was in Monroe, Michigan. I said, come up and let's go to that Christmas party, youth party at Pontiac Church, and see if there's any good-looking girls over there. And so that was something Delbert really responded to. So he came up, we went to the party, and that's where I met Jan. She was the prettiest young lady I had ever seen. And we went together for 2.5 years. And then we got married, and the rest is history. The greatest pastor's wife, minister's wife. Everywhere I go, I often tell people when I was pastoring, and we used to vote pastoral preference expression every 4 years, and then we moved it to 2. But every time there was a vote for us, a preference expression, I'd always tell the people, now folks, as you fill out this ballot today, remember one thing that's very important. If I leave, Jan's leaving. If I stay, Jan is staying. And it worked every time, Michael. Never did I have a problem getting votes because of Jan.
Wow. Well, I'm sure you could say, like myself, that we married up. We did really good for ourselves, didn't we?
I'm married up. That's all I can say. And we're just so excited about what God has done for us. And tomorrow is our 59th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow.
So,
Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you. We're just excited. We're going to go back to Gatlinburg this afternoon and be there tomorrow because that's where we went on our honeymoon. And Gatlinburg, like everything else, has changed big time since 1961.
Wow. Well, congratulations. What a milestone. Well, after being married, your ministry, of course, began. What was your early days of ministry like? First of all, what office did you hold? Were you a pastor, evangelist? Tell us a little bit how you began in ministry and where you started out at.
I started evangelizing, and I went on in January, 1st of January, in fact, New Year's Eve, and preached in Ontario, Canada. I left the United States to preach my first sermon. And I started there. And from that point on, I've never had to ask for an appointment or a preaching assignment. My schedule filled up. I preached for 2.5 years in evangelistic work. And then we began our pastoral work because back in those days, it was quite different in the church because you worked from a standpoint of pastoring. It was a time when if you were going anywhere in the church, you had to pastor.
Sure.
And you had to prove yourself there before you would go anywhere else. And so we started pastoring, and I look back on those years and those experiences, and back to my father. He was a great teacher because Brother Harvey Rose, Delbert Rose's father, when we'd go to ministers' retreats here or in Georgia when I pastored in Atlanta, he wanted to stay with me. So we would stay together. And he told me one time, he said, Larry, get all the education you can because it will serve a purpose. But Lee College is not going to teach you how to pastor a church. You've got to get out there and do it. That's the only way you will learn. And that's another thing that became a reality in my life. They can give you a lot of things and tools to work with. But when you move into that role as a pastor, then my father and many, many others have been giants in the faith for me.
Experience makes the difference, doesn't it?
It does. It's absolutely the greatest tool that we can adapt to in order to be who God's called us to be.
Yes. Well, from being a pastor, I know that at one time you pastored the Princeton Pike Church in Hamilton, Ohio. But what were some of your other assignments? Where did you pastor other than Hamilton?
I pastored in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and there was a time, of course, I've always been an evangelist. If I was pastoring, I was an evangelist. If I was a youth director, I was a pastor. If I was an estate evangelism director, I was an evangelist. If I was on any other position in the church, I was always an evangelist. And so for 1 year, when I got to Kalamazoo, we struggled, and we had, I think, 16 the first Sunday we were there, counting Jan and I and Debbie, our daughter. And I'd done everything that I learned to do in my short ministry. And I preached the same sermons I preached in evangelistic work. I tried my best to get something happening, but it didn't happen. This is good for any young person that is pastoring a church. But for 1 year, it was a struggle. But then 1 year to the week, I felt led to call Sister Evelyn Zingmark. She was a lady evangelist. I was, of course, very green in a lot of ways. I was still learning. And I told her on the phone when I invited her, I said, now, Sister Evelyn, I'll tell you, because I'm up front with everything I do, I really never have been fond of women preachers. And she said, well, Brother Larry, if I understand that, but if you feel led for me to come, I'll come. And I said, well, I feel like you ought to come. And she came, and we had a 6 weeks revival every night, morning and night. And our church took in 129 adult members in 6 weeks. We went from $50 and $60 a month tithes to over surplus, over 1,000. And back in those days, that wasn't too bad. And so we had a 3-year revival then in Kalamazoo. Every service was revival. And our church grew, and God just manifested himself in such a powerful way. We'll always remember Kalamazoo because of that. But then I was called to ask to come to Mississippi as the youth director. And of course, in our church, we have always thought, or this is the impression you get nonetheless, that you had not succeeded unless you were either appointed or elected to something. And it was almost like, even till today, some don't want a pastor, they want to be in a position in a state or general offices. And that's okay if that's what they desire to do, but they're missing something that is really will change their whole life, because there's the local church is the heartbeat of the church. It gives everything to the church. Without the local church, there'd be no general offices. There'd be no state offices. The pastor is the key man to everything that goes on in the church. And if he succeeds, we all succeed. If he fails, we'll all fail. So the thing that I did, I left Kalamazoo and went as a youth director because that was such an honor to be a state youth director. And it still is. But I learned a lot through the years going from positions. But I went from the youth director after 4.5 years at Mississippi to the evangelism director. I was the first evangelism director in the state of Mississippi. And while I was youth director, I was also the state evangelist because everybody invited me to preach revival. Anyway, we're so thankful for all of those experiences because each one of them helped us to move to where God would have us to go.
Absolutely. Well, you have also been state overseer of several states. Where have you been able to serve in those capacities?
I was pastoring in Atlanta, and we had a great time in Atlanta. I went from Mississippi evangelism director to the Lawrenceville Church of God in Atlanta. And God blessed us there, and we had 7 years of phenomenal growth. And the committee asked me to go to Southern Ohio as the overseer. And so back to the same thing. What an honor it is to be appointed as a state overseer. Now I look back after 80 years of life and 60 plus years of ministry. And I think to myself, I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed in Atlanta. I wonder what would have happened if I'd have stayed at Princeton Pike, one of the greatest churches in our organization to this day. And, but that's the way I think we so often are influenced, because it is an honor to serve in leadership in the church. But now I watch men that have stayed a lifetime in a city, and they've built tremendous ministries, and their families are involved, and they're doing more for the kingdom than some states are doing, in fact. And so you wonder and second guess yourself, but when the day is done, you realize that every place you have been has served a purpose in your ministry and in your life, and you wouldn't take anything in the world for the experience.
Absolutely. So Southern Ohio, and I know
Southern Ohio,
to Florida.
And then I went to Rocky Mountain region.
Okay.
And I'll just be real transparent with you. I'm at a point now that sometimes I wouldn't be totally honest. I wouldn't tell a lie, but I just wouldn't say certain things because of the positions I was in. But, you know, when I was appointed to Southern Ohio, not many, but you hear a little flack that, you know, I got a great state, and I did. Southern Ohio was a great appointment. And, but I heard that. And so whenever the committee called me and asked me if I'd go to the Rocky Mountain region, I had a feeling inside that this is an opportunity for me to show the guys that the big states are not really what I'm looking for. I'm more interested in ministry. And so I went to the Rocky Mountain region because I wanted to maybe eliminate some of that feeling maybe. And I've had people tell me even after I retired ministers, friends of mine, that, you know, we thought that why did you get certain appointments? And so that was one of the reasons that I went there. But then I left there, and this is a never heard of thing almost. I went to Florida as overseer. And we had 4 of the great years in Florida. When I crossed the Florida line, moving to Florida in 1994, God gave me the plan for the first year between the line and Tampa. The Holy Spirit. I was driving one car, pulling a trailer, and Jan was driving another car. And that close to 200-mile trip from the line down, I heard from God. And when in our first ministers meeting, I laid that out, and I've never seen a state gravitate toward a ministry the way they did. And it just exploded. God just blessed us in every possible way. And we had 4 great years. Our camp meetings were incredible. We'd close out with actual counts. These aren't estimating, evangelistically speaking, but we'd close out with 7,000 and 8,000 people. And that was going Monday through Sunday. And you look back at all of these things and you think, well, I could have done this or I could have done that, but I'm glad I did what I did at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, speaking of camp meetings, I'll never forget something that you told me. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2013 or 14 when you preached a camp meeting here in Eastern North Carolina. You and I were conversing at lunch, and you said if it was up to me, we would go back to 2-week camp meetings because of your love for camp meeting.
Right.
God has blessed you and privileged you to be able to preach numerous camp meetings throughout our movement. How do you think that those camp meetings affected your ministry? What did those meetings mean to you to be able to preach those?
Well, they are so valuable to me at this point. I have a lot of friends here in Cleveland that are retired ministers. And I've been so blessed. I started evangelizing again in 2013. And I have been busy all these years until March of this year. And my schedule has been full. And once in a while, there's a group of us retired men that would meet at Golden Corral and eat on Mondays if we were in town. So when I would get to go, then they would ask me, how do you stay as busy as you are? And I said, well, when you stop to think how blessed I've been and the invitations that I've had to preach, I've preached 170 camp meetings. I've preached over 100 prayer conferences. I preached youth camps when I was a young man. And I've met so many people. And that's why I stay as busy. If you had done what I have done and been to the places I've been, you'd be the same way. And I realize it's not me that really has made anything like that happen. It's God, and it's the fact that relationships open doors. And I've just got a lot of relationships across the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 170 camp meetings, 100 prayer conferences. That is unheard of. That is amazing. And so those doors have opened for you. That is just an incredible testimony to the favor of God and also the favor of men, because they, of course, have to entrust you to come minister to their people. From these pastorates and state overseerships, you were elected by our General Assembly to hold several positions. Tell us a little bit about that experience and the positions that you have held for our denomination.
In 1998, while I was in Florida, I was elected into the Evangelism and Home Missions Department. It was known at that time. And That's another thing. I probably shouldn't have left Florida, but I did because it's such an honor to be elected by your peers to any position. And I revere that, and I appreciate it so very, very much. I guess I look back and uh, I could have evangelized my whole ministry and been happy. I could have pastored my entire ministry and been happy. I could have been in administrative work and been happy because I love people. I like to see men prosper. And that's one of the things that I'm still doing with men that have been at a church for a long tenure. I'm doing so many 30-year anniversaries for pastors now. Had to put 2 off because of this problem we're dealing with right now. And so I've got one of them supposed to take place next month if it works, and another one in November, putting it off so that the people can come together. But, you look at the international office, I think the most attractive thing about the Evangelism and Home Missions Department was I was an evangelist. And I felt like that I could do something there that would be beneficial to the kingdom and to the church. And so that is the primary reason that I received that and put my whole life into it. And so when it's all said and done, I spent 12 years in Evangelism and Home Missions Department. And that's the longest tenure of any man ever in Evangelism and Home Missions here in Cleveland. And I wish I could have done more, but you've got to work through the channels that we as a church operate in. And I understand all of that. And I want to give all of those that I work with recommendations of appreciation because we should respect those leaders and give them due process. And so I worked for some great men in the international offices, general overseers and executive committee members. And I also, in Evangelism and Home Missions, you had to raise most of the money you had to spend. And that can be quite challenging when everybody in the international offices is trying to raise money, for their ministries also. But I enjoyed my 12 years there. I wish I could have done more because the evangelist is one of the 5 ministry gifts that is placed in the church. And after the changes started taking place in Evangelism and Home Missions, I wish we could put more emphasis on our evangelists because I don't ever want to lose our Pentecostal heritage. And the evangelists probably do more to substantiate that than any other office in the church. And so I am praying that, and that's a point that I think Dr. Hill has really emphasized.
He has.
He has promoted our evangelist, and he himself is a powerful evangelist. And so I appreciate all that's being done, but as an evangelist, I want to see you young guys really promoted and pushed and supported because you are the lifeline of our church.
Oh, bless your heart. I have told you this personally. In fact, back in January of 2019, we were standing in Longhorn up in Cleveland. And I do not say this with, any malice, I should say, because we, as you mentioned, we understand that things change, organization changes. But I told you to your face, and I'll tell it to all those that are watching, if we would have been able to have continued the Evangelism and Home Missions Department, and if you would have been able to have led it at that time, I believe that we were at a point where it could have really exploded to become exactly what we needed it to be, because you are an evangelist at heart. You have the passion, you have the drive and the anointing to carry the evangelist into that era. And so I really, really would have loved to have seen what, and we can't hold on to what could have been, but I would have loved to have seen what could have happened with you at the helm of that department. And, you know, with that said, you are an evangelist currently. You travel the
Yeah.
country abroad. Share with us, because, you know, being an evangelist myself, and, you know, I'm in a different church every week. Of course, up until this COVID thing happened, our schedule was really tight. But it is an office in the church.
Yes.
Some apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. So it is an office, and we are to work together for the edifying of the body, for the perfecting of the saints. How important is the role of the evangelist to the church of God? And how important is it that our local churches schedule revival meetings?
Well, from my perspective, it's absolutely mandatory
Yes.
because even though I understand the fact that as a church grows in numbers numerically, they have to change the way they do certain ministries in the church. But the thing that I do feel that is important is that people are in every congregation that wants to see an evangelistic thrust from time to time. And it says something to the people in the church about our desire to see people saved, to see them healed, delivered, set free. There's things that happen in the atmosphere of an evangelistic campaign that doesn't happen at any other time. It's the emphasis that is placed upon it. And there was something birthed in me when I was 5 years old in Gastonia, North Carolina. My father took me to one of Oral Roberts' tent crusades. And back in those days, those big, large tents would be packed and people standing out around the tents. And because Dad was a pastor in the area, we got to go right down front and sit. And so I watched him pray for people. And there was a little boy about my age came up when they had to carry him. He was crippled, his arms, his legs, he couldn't walk. And Oral Roberts put his hand on him and prayed for him. And his arms straightened out, his legs straightened out. And he walked off of that rostrum on his own power. And I looked at Dad when that happened and I said, Dad, I want to do that. And I've never gotten away from that. Wow. I still to this day enjoy seeing people liberated from all of the hindrances that they have to be who God has created them to be. Because every person has a purpose. God has brought them into this world to do a specific thing for Him. And if they understand that and they follow Him, then if you can play just a role in that, it is the most gratifying thing in the world. Outside of going and preaching where I do now, I get just this last week, I got an email from a lady that said that 30-something years ago in a camp meeting, she described her illness and her situation and said that night God instantly healed her. And she said, to this day, I'll never forget that night when the power of God came in the top of my head and went out the soles of my feet. And those are the greatest testimonies. Those are the greatest reward for 60 years of ministry. If I hear a young man that writes me a letter and he says, the day you came to see me in prison and I gave my heart to Jesus, now I'm out of prison. I've got my own business, but it was because you came to the prison. And the thing is now, that's the greatest reward there is. And an evangelist plays a role in a church. Every pastor has to pastor his people. And an evangelist comes in with the fire of revival burning in his soul. I've always had the philosophy, if you don't, I've heard some evangelists, not many years ago, say, I didn't bring a revival. Well, I want a revival in the life of the evangelist that comes to my church. If
Exactly.
he's not revived, he can't help my church.
Exactly.
And so the thing is, we need somebody to come in and do what only an evangelist can do for a local church. Even Stephen Furtick, who has the mega church program right out of Charlotte, you know, he has a 2-week revival every year, every night at his churches. And, you know, if you have the right kind of services, people will come. If God is there, people will show up. They showed up for Jesus in the New Testament, and they'll show up today if he is in the service.
Amen. I believe that with all of my heart. Well, Brother Timmerman, I want to close out with 2 questions. One, of all the accomplishments that you have achieved, what is the one singular thing that you are most proud of?
Well, I think my work in the pastorate now is my greatest sense of accomplishment. The things that God did in Kalamazoo, Lawrenceville, Princeton Pike, those are the most gratifying things, because now I'm on Facebook with adults who were just children back in those days. And they relate to me and they talk to me about what happened back in those days and what that meant to them. And, oh, you have all of this happening in other areas also. I understand that. But Eddie Francisco in Kalamazoo was a Catholic family. He and his brother Stanley were just 8, 9 years old. And their dad, Stanley, was a Catholic. He'd been the head usher at St. Augustine Catholic Church in Kalamazoo, Michigan for 14 years, diagnosed with cancer. And he heard my radio program on Saturday morning and called and said, can you come to my house and pray for me? And I got to his house. And he looked at me, he was death warmed over, 3 months to live. And he said, do you believe what you preached this morning? Now, a young man, when you preach faith and you look at a dying man and he asks you that question, it really puts you to the test. Yeah. I'll never forget it. And I said, yes, Stan, I believe God can heal regardless of the circumstances. And I prayed for him that day. Nothing you could see happen. But the next day, they were in church. They come in after while the choir was singing. And the 2 boys and his wife, Gracie, sat down in the back. And the choir, as they got to singing, the Spirit of the Lord was moving in the service. And I got up, went to the pulpit, and I said, Stan, if you'll come up here and let me pray for you, God's going to heal you today. And they all helped him walk up there on either side. And when I started to put my hand on his head, he just started falling back. And I had some other men that had come up then. And he went out in the Spirit. And when he woke up, he was smiling. And he got up, he was stronger. And he said, Pastor, I'm healed. There's something different. There's something not that I haven't felt before. And long story short, he taught the Sunday school class, auditorium Sunday school class there for years. And they were very strong supporters of our church. And Eddie, the boy, played a guitar and he sung and he made records in Nashville and all over. But now he's doing nursing homes. That's his heart's desire, because he says there is where he's getting the greatest sense of accomplishment. And he says, Pastor, the reason I'm in these nursing homes and doing what I'm doing was the years that you were in Kalamazoo. That's the greatest thing. That's why I say that pastoring probably is the single. If I were to say something else, I'd probably say that being voted chairman of the Council of 18 was a highlight of that era in my life, because that's our highest council in the Church of God. It operates the church between assemblies, and to be able to work those years with Dr. Walker, Paul Walker, was a tremendous honor. So I have been so blessed in all of this that I just give God praise every day for every opportunity. I don't have any complaints. Everything is good with me. I want the church to be blessed. I want everybody to be blessed. And I want every man and woman to get what they really desire in their hearts, because I know it would make them happy.
Yes, yes. Well, the final question, number 2, if you could give one word of advice to young ministers today, knowing all the offices that you've held, all of your experience, the things that you have learned, what would that advice be?
Wow, I could say a lot of things there, but I would probably say these 3 things, 3 points that I would make. And that is, in your life and ministry, deal with these 3 things. Number 1, order. Order is so important in everything that we do, because order is becoming subject to those that have rule over you. And when you work in a process or a movement like the Church of God or any other, sometimes, because we're all human, you don't always get what you want when you want it. But the thing that you understand is your attitude during those times is what God is preparing you for in your future. And you realize that if you bring yourself under subjection and have order in your life. Order is not in the streets of America right now, that's for sure. But that is one of our gravest problems, and one of our greatest challenges is the fact that we've lost order. And when you come under subjection to those that are over you, if it does not conflict with the Word of God, whatever it is that you're asked to do, it will prepare you for what God has already planned for you in your future. The second is focus. You've got to focus on the things that you really desire, the things that you really want to happen. Like if you're pastoring a church or an overseer or youth director, whatever you are in the church, you've got to decide, what is my greatest desire in this particular role that I am in, and focus on that. Don't let anything break your focus, because that's the way the enemy deters us and gets us off on rabbit trails and on issues that do not relate to what God has put into our spirit. So we've got to focus on what we really want to see happen. And I have found that even every move that I've ever made, when I focused on what I wanted to see happen there, that's when doors began to open. And God began to say, well, I guess I'll put you in this for a while, or this opportunity will come. But it's as you are focused on where you're at and make something happen for the glory of God and the upbuilding of the kingdom. Then the third thing is structure. Structure is being organized. And you have got to have your week and your month and your year organized in whatever you're going to do for the kingdom of God. And that goes for not just the church work or spiritual things, that goes for everyday life. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have a way of making the desires of your heart happen. And so you've got to live a structured life. I was running myself to death because of the growth that was in Lawrenceville. And I was struggling because I couldn't get everything done. And I preached a sermon one Sunday and I told them, I'm going to start operating on a schedule. And I went, this is what I'll be doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday and Sunday. And 2 of those days was pulpit preparation. I said, if I'm not ready on Sunday morning and Sunday night to come in here and give you a word from God, I can't do the rest of what I'm supposed to be doing here. And so the thing that I would say is get you a plan, because if you don't, everybody else will set your agenda and make your schedule so that it becomes frustrating and what they call burnout today. But I'm not so much for thinking of it in terms of burnout, because the Holy Spirit has never been burnout. And if you'll stay in the Spirit, you'll stay fresh every day of your life. And when you've done everything you can do for God, then let God take the rest of it and you be at peace with it. That's what I would suggest after these years of ministry.
Wow. What wonderful advice. What wonderful advice. Well, Brother Timmerman, this has been an incredible time of fellowship and discussion. I cannot thank you enough for the work and the labor for the Lord that you have done, for the leadership and the guidance that you've given our movement, for your influence that you've had on the young men and women across our denomination. I thank you and I praise God for you. And I just pray blessings upon you in the days ahead, that God will continue to use you for his glory. I want to also thank our production manager, Dwayne Morey, and for the Eastern North Carolina State Office for allowing us to use these facilities to do this interview. And I'm just looking forward to the other interviews that will be taking place over the next few weeks and months. And I'm just believing that God is going to inspire some folks to get out and do the work of the Lord and to continue to walk in the path that our spiritual giants and our heroes of the faith have paved for us. So may God richly bless you. We love you and appreciate each and every one of you who have watched. And until next time, the Lord keep you.